Hey everyone, this is Mario again, coming at you with another video. I am finally getting off my keister and doing the first of the top 10 videos that I said I was going to do. And like I said in a previous video, I have started it off with a top 10 Star Wars one. And this is top 10 Lightsaber Duels. Just a heads up, I'm not only taking these from the movies, but I'm also taking it from some of the expanded universe works, such as both Clone Wars TV shows, the novels, the comics, etc. But I'll give a heads up that a majority of these are from the movies, but some of them are going to be backed up with the novelization inserts. Anyway, we start off with a duel from Episode 1. The duel on Naboo between Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Darth Maul. Now the first thing that this fight does is it shows how much grander lightsaber dueling was before the fall of the Old Republic and the rise of the Empire. Because in the original trilogy, the duels weren't that elaborate. I mean, they were great duels with great swordsmanship and footwork, but Vader and Luke have the same fighting style. Basically, Form 5 with modifications to each suit them. Luke's being is that he does not have the proper instruction, so it's basically just him reading about the forms and then developing his own style from them, whereas Vader's is modification to suit his handicap. Now this duel shows the grandness of the fighting styles, and also it showcases two fighting styles that we haven't seen yet, because Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's fighting styles are Form 4, whereas Maul's is Form 7, the most aggressive style, which is hardly ever used by Jedi. Of course, at the time the movie came out, we didn't know that. This is basically elaborated on in the expanded universe. Hey, I told you there's going to be expanded universe stuff in here. So it being more acrobatic doesn't bother me, because one, like I mentioned, back in the days, is with Lucas's intention to show off more of the fighting style of how they were when the Jedi were at their peak. And also the fact is that dueling, usually, except for fencing, I wouldn't really call fencing this, but like more like Asian forms of sword fighting, like katana warfare and stuff, are a martial art. So it to be more acrobatic would make sense. It not being that acrobatic in episodes 4 through 6 would make sense, considering Luke more on instinct than actually through studying, and Vader is handicapped, so he can't really do that many acrobatic stuff. But it showcases it, and even people who don't really like Episode 1 say that the duel is their favorite part of the movie, which I can see why. It also doesn't hurt matters that in the movie, Maul is played by a martial artist, so that works. Granted, he's not voiced by it because his voice is dubbed over, but still, it helps. Now, of course, in retrospect, the only thing about Form 4 we don't really see is the acrobatic thing. We don't really see that until the next movie, but it works. And I have to say, it is probably one of my favorite parts of the movie, and it's a duel that definitely deserves to be on this list. Number 9 is a duel from the next movie. It is Yoda versus Dooku. Now, the reason that this is on the list is because Dooku is supposed to be, at least for this movie, he's supposed to be the secondary antagonist who basically is basically out in the front, because the main antagonist of the whole Star Wars saga, at least the live-action movies, is the Emperor. He's behind the scenes in the first movie that was made. You see him for one scene in the next movie. He's full in the front in Episode 6, and then, of course, he's working in it's a combination of the first and last one in the prequel trilogy. And this one, his front man is Dooku, his apprentice. So what better way to get across how badass Dooku is than to have him duel our protagonists first and kick their butt? Just think of it. During his duel with Obi-Wan, he's basically playing with him the whole time, and he easily beats him with a few quick blade works, which that's one of the reasons I like Form 2, because it's more focused on blade work, which is why I'm glad it's actually kind of based off fencing, and you can tell that. It's harder to tell in the movies, but in the video games and in the Clone Wars show, you could tell more because of Dooku's movements. If you know anything about fencing movements, you can notice that his is more about finesse and moving blade work and footwork in sync to get past your opponent's defenses and overwhelm them. Not through force, but through finesse. Which is why, if you also notice, he uses a lot of one-handed movements. And then, of course, in comes Yoda, and up until this point, we had never seen Yoda duel before. We'd seen him use the Force, and we've seen him lecture, but we've never seen him fight. But, of course, as we know, he is a warrior. I mean, all Jedis have to be warriors at some point, but As we know from Yoda, one of Yoda's first lines of dialogue in Episode 5, he does not like being a warrior. As he tells Luke, wars not make one great. So from that, we can guess that while he probably is a skilled duelist, he does not particularly like to do it to solve conflict. I mean, and even at the beginning of the movie, they mention he's a swordsman. If you practice your saber techniques as much as you're rescuing, you would rival Master Yoda as a swordsman. So from that comment, we know that Yoda's probably one of the best swordsmen in the Order. And this scene even proves that. I mean, after their Force battle, we get into a lightsaber duel. And of course, one of the first things that probably shocked a lot of people when the movie came out is how quick Yoda moves. I mean, we see him walking with the gimmer stick. Then he starts moving, jumping around, slashing his lightsaber, making movements that someone would probably not guess he could make. But then again, as he said, judge me by my size, do you? And also we should know from the Emperor that you should not judge someone who uses the Force based on their appearance. I mean, the Emperor looks old, but he's powerful as hell, and the same thing with Yoda. And of course, his form is Form 4, just like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan used in Episode 1. But the difference is, unlike them, where we don't really see much of the acrobatics, it's more about the blade work that we see because of the spaces they're fighting in. Here we actually get to see the acrobatic nature of Form 4 in action, and it works. Because not only does Yoda's size benefit the form, because since he's much smaller than a human, he could use the form better, and in areas where a human would not be able to use it quite as well, but also because of the nature of how it uses the Force, it more befits him. Because if I remember correctly, he has a basic knowledge of at least all the forms, but Form 4 is his preferred version. And of course, also combined with the fact that he knows Dooku very well, and how he fights and stuff, he's able to easily beat Dooku. Because granted, the fight, technically I would say ends in a stalemate, at least because there's not a definite winner, but blade-wise you can see Yoda's the winner because Dooku has to resort to a Sith-like trick in order to win. Even more so in a deleted scene where he goes and uses 2 lightsabers to attack Yoda, which of course, afterwards it's kind of stated that he considers that to be dishonorable, which would make sense. He is a gentleman character, Dooku is. But it does really show, this duel shows off how badass Yoda is. Number 8 is the only duel on here from the original Clone Wars animated series. It is the debut of General Grievous. Now, Grievous is basically takes Dooku's place in Episode 3 because of Dooku being killed off too early. But he does very well in taking that place. So what better way to introduce the character than to have a debut where the Jedi are kind of freaked out about him, and then he basically kicks a bunch of Jedi butt. And what makes it even better is that 2 of the Jedi we know are very skilled duelists, because we know that Ki-Adi-Mundi is a skilled duelist, and Shaak Ti is supposed to be one of the most skilled duelists in the Order. So if he beat them, you could tell he's badass. And of course, I like the voice in his dialogue. Make peace with the Force, for this is your final hour. And then of course, later on, we see him training with Dooku and seeing that if you train with Dooku, no wonder his skills are that way. And then of course, we find out in the expanded universe works that he was a warrior before he became a machine. And of course, it's a great introduction for him. Now, some people may complain how he's defeated easily in Episode 3 by Obi-Wan, but I think it's more so of how slow they made the lightsaber duel in the movie as compared to the novel. In the novel, his duel with Obi-Wan is a lot better, because then again, since it's in your mind's eye, you can actually picture it going very quickly, which is what I did. And also the fact that since Obi-Wan's form of Form 3 is based more on defense than offense, it would make sense that he would be the one to defeat him, since he perfected Form 3. So it makes sense, but that duel's not on here, but just say I don't have a problem with it. But Grievous's debut works wonders. Now I will say if there's anything ruining Grievous, it's probably some of his appearances in the Clone War animated series. I feel that if they're going to have him fight Jedi, have him fight one that we know would probably at least stand a chance against him, fending him off for short periods of time, or have him fight against random Jedi that you could afford to kill off. I mean, they did that once, and then they have... Now, one duel that's not on here, but it's an honorable mention, would be Grievous's duel against Kit Fisto. That one is how Grievous should be portrayed, just basically having a Jedi being able to defend, but not really do any real damage to him. Because the only thing that happens is he loses a hand, and then the rest of it's just defense until Kit Fisto has to retreat. But what he does earlier in killing that other Jedi, that's how he should be. Now, of course, moving on, Episode 7. Number 7. This is technically a couple duels in one, but I have to mention them all together. Anakin versus Dooku. More specifically, this is two of them. One from the Clone Wars animated series and one from the movie. The animated series one, I don't know what episode it is, but I have seen the duel. If I remember correctly, the lead up is that Dooku captured Palpatine, or should I say captured Palpatine. Anakin breaks in to go get him, and then they have a duel. And during it, Dooku is beginning to realize how fast Anakin's skills are approaching, and he doesn't tap into the dark side yet, but Dooku has to use the Force and get away. Remember, this part of this duel is based more on memory. I haven't seen it in a while, but at one point you can definitely read in Dooku's face that he is maybe a little afraid of how skilled Anakin is becoming, or maybe more so, or maybe that his skills are grown more than what he expected. But I like this because it kind of connects to the whole thing of Palpatine and Dooku working behind the scenes, because it's never mentioned in the movie, but it's mentioned in the novelization, and I actually think this part of the novelization would be considered canon to the greater Star Wars continuity. But Dooku and Palpatine knew that Anakin would eventually turn to the dark side, or they were trying to get him to turn to the dark side, and they were working together on how to figure out a way to do it, and they figured that Obi-Wan's death would do it, hence part of that duel. But Dooku knew that eventually he'd have to duel Anakin and get him to turn to the dark side, so I'm guessing that he probably knew that far in advance, and that's the reason why he was doing those few duels against him like that one to test him. At least that's just my theory, and like I said, I haven't watched all the show, but based on that, I would guess that he probably knew of the plan and was probably a little amazed at how quickly to that moment they were getting. And then, of course, we come to the next duel, which is their duel aboard Invisible Hand, which is the name of it, which is the duel we see at the beginning of Episode 3. Now, what I like about this is it starts off as a three-way duel, Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Dooku. And the funny thing I like about it, this is more clear in the novel than it is in the movie, but you can tell a little bit of it in the movie, but the duel, Obi-Wan and Anakin start the duel just basically playing with Dooku, and they get him to be overconfident. I mean, in the novelization, we get his inner muse where he's saying, "These fools had learned nothing since Geonosis," and he taunts them, then Obi-Wan's like, "Well, shall we really get started then?" Then they start using their actual styles, because they start out the duel with Obi-Wan using Form 4 and Anakin using the other form of Form 5, Shin I believe is pronounced, which is basically the reverse grip thing that we see Starkiller use. And of course, they get overwhelmed. And of course, you can guess Dooku gets overwhelmed easily. And he eventually has to cheat, as he puts it. It is okay for a gentleman to cheat. And eventually, as it goes on, it's basically just Anakin versus Dooku. And what I like about this is it shows that even though he has the anger in him, Anakin can hold it back when he chooses to. And of course, it also shows how skilled a duelist Anakin was before his accident, because he's able to beat back Dooku, one of the finest swordsmen the Jedi Order possessed. A swordsman so great that in single combat, two of the only Jedi that could defeat him were Mace and Yoda. I believe the Battle Master could have, but it's never mentioned. But every other Jedi would probably be at least his equal, but only those two probably were his superiors. So you can get the idea from there how skilled a duelist Dooku was. The fact that Anakin by that point was able to beat him back single-handedly without using the dark side of the Force, just using his mastery of Form 5, just shows how skilled he had become. It also doesn't hurt that Form 5 is basically this natural enemy of Form 2, because Form 2 is all about finesse and single-handed strokes, whereas Form 5 is kind of a more offensive version of Form 3, where Form 3 is basically about defending and turning your opponent's offense and turning your defense into an offense when your opponent leaves an opening, which is how Obi-Wan is able to use it to defeat Grievous. But Form 5, it's about defending and then attacking. Like, you block a blow, push it back, and then attack. That you see a little bit of in the original trilogy, which I'll get to later. But the thing is, it uses a lot of strength. So I guess you can see from there how it is the natural enemy of Form 2. Think of it. A lot of strength with two hands, going down on a style that's basically based on fencing, where you're using a lot of one-hand things. Then you're not going to have a lot of kinetic energy to fight back. I mean, Dooku even muses about this when he sees how skilled Anakin is in the novelization. And of course, he makes the big mistake, which in retrospect it would be a big mistake, but at the time he didn't realize this, of taunting him Well, at least he only does that in the novel, but I think it's actually pretty cool. Hero with no fear. You're a joke, Skywalker. Aren't you a little old to be afraid of the dark? And then, of course, from there, Anakin loses control a little bit, cuts off Dooku's hand, and then, of course, kills him. And, of course, we all know Dooku gets shocked by his death right before it, but it works. Okay, number 6 is a duel from one of the video games. It's the duel from Force Unleashed. It is Starkiller versus Vader and Palpatine. Now, what I like about this duel is that the whole video game we've got to know Starkiller. We've seen that he's been basically a slave his whole life. Basically, Vader just using him for his own means. Because we see that all throughout. I mean, of course, even after he betrays him, he still works for Vader, although he is wary of him there. Which, of course, as Shaak Ti tells him right before, the Sith always betray one another. And as Dooku mused before his death in the novelization of Episode 3, treachery is the way of the Sith. Which is true, the Sith always do betray one another. It's part of the whole thing of the student always having to kill the master. Which, of course, that kind of did stop with Palpatine, well, for the most part. Because we all know what happens to Palpatine, but Starkiller redeeming himself and becoming a Jedi by the end of the game is a very great redemption story. And this story could easily have been an animated movie unto itself. Which, if they do any animated direct-to-DVD movies, I'd love to see an adaptation of Force Unleashed, based more on the novelization, obviously, but it'd still be interesting. And of course, the thing I like is that he is one of only 2 Jedi who beat the crap out of Vader in a duel, the other, of course, being Luke. But of course, how he beats Vader is interesting. I don't know how he does it in the novel, but in the video game it seems that Force-wise, Vader with his handicap and him might be equal, but it's hard to tell because it's never fully stated how much weaker Vader is with his handicap. Most people, and I probably go more with this, that he's probably about, that with before his handicap he was going to be at least double the Emperor's strength, but now with it I more put him like 8/10 of the Emperor's strength. But that's more so probably maybe because a little bit of his handicap, but also because of his mental handicap. Without it, he'd probably be equal to the Emperor, but it's hard to tell. They never really fully go into it. But anyway, Starkiller being that strong alone is a feat. Especially considering Vader was conceived by the Force and passed his Force sensitivity strength onto his children. But to get another Jedi who could match Vader even with his handicap, that's a feat in and of itself. Yoda probably could do it, but only for his age. He'd probably only do it for a short period of time, and he'd probably only win with a Force battle. But he probably wouldn't want to do it anyway. But anyway, but the real thing is that he matches Vader with the lightsaber, which is another interesting feat. Then again, it's not that hard to imagine, because Luke managed to get Vader to go serious with only minimal training, and the only Jedi before that had managed to do that were Jedi who were part of the original order. Vader always went serious when he was fighting a Jedi from before, and he also went serious when he was fighting Obi-Wan in Episode 4. And at the beginning of the duel with Luke, he doesn't go serious, and then near the end he does. Which I guess you could consider as Vader's mark of approval of how skilled his own son is, that he has to go serious against him. But of course, you could guess with Starkiller, he goes serious from the beginning, because, hey, he trained the guy himself. Even if he thinks he's not going to lose, he's still going to not mess around. And of course, since Starkiller knows Vader's fighting style a lot, he's going to know the weaknesses. Like, one of Vader's weaknesses would probably be that you have to take out his prosthetics, which is what Starkiller does. I don't know if he does this in the novel. Like I said, I haven't read it, but in the video game, one of the things he does is knock off his mask. Whether that's by accident or on purpose, I don't know. But if it's on purpose, it's a good move. And then take out one of it, then injure one of his legs. Then, as you injure him, start beating him down, and also use the Force use his thing of his tendency to throw stuff at you against him. And of course, he eventually beats him, and then he has to fight the Emperor, which the Emperor, I'd say, is probably still stronger than Starkiller, but he probably underestimated Starkiller, which is why Starkiller got him in that position where he could almost kill him. And of course, you know, the Emperor goading him into turning over to the dark side again, but it doesn't work. And Starkiller becomes a martyr, which I think works. And of course, it's interesting to note that Vader and the Emperor created the Rebel Alliance unwittingly, which some people might be like, that's kind of stupid. The thing of the Rebel Alliance was already there. I think it's interesting. And it would also make sense why it would take so long to make the Rebel Alliance. or why it would take nearly 20 years for them to get it together. Granted, you would think, oh, to make a rebellion would take a while, which that I could see. But I think by it more that they probably were ready to do it, but they didn't have a leader to, and then this Jedi came forward and got them to go, and then because of him being a martyr, they decided to rally behind his sacrifice and become it. But it also adds something interesting to the storyline that I wonder. I wonder how some of the leaders who were there during the founding, because I know all of them, because Organa's dead by the time Luke shows up and the other one is gone and hiding. I wonder how some of the leaders who were members of the Alliance when it founded, I wonder what they thought of Luke when he came forward and started becoming a Jedi. Because at that point he wouldn't have been as skilled or as powerful as Starkiller. I wonder if they mentioned him to him or something. It's just something interesting. I'd like to see it touched on in the expanded universe. Anyway, the next one is a double-tiered one, but I think that they both deserve to be here because of their significance to the storyline. It is Yoda versus Palpatine and Mace versus Palpatine. I'm going to go in chronological order, so I'll touch on the Mace one first. The significance of this one is it's the first time we actually get to see the Emperor wield a lightsaber. And it's also the first time in the continuity we actually get to see the Emperor fight, because technically speaking, in Episode 6, he doesn't really fight. He tortures and then gets killed. Here we actually get to see him fight. Now, of course, the Emperor in the expanded universe, he mentions that he doesn't really like using a lightsaber. Actually, like is not the proper word. He doesn't see the need to wield one, I would say. But he does so, because as he tells Vader, the Sith long ago outgrew the use of lightsabers. We only still continue to wield them to humiliate the Jedi. Which, of course, that would be his reason, but we all know why Vader has to continue to wield one, handicap and all. So, him wielding the lightsaber in this scene is just him humiliating the Jedi. And in the movie, he humiliates two of them very quickly, which in that respect, I prefer the movie version of events of how the first two Jedi die, because it just shows off more of his skill, whereas in the other two, he catches them off guard and kills them easily without a thing. So, for him getting past the defenses works better. And then, of course, Mace and Kit Fisto are the only one to survive a few blocks, even though Kit lasts longer in the novelization, which I think actually befits him as a duelist more than him being killed off quickly. But movie-wise, pacing, they had to make the fight more about Mace versus the Emperor, which works. And this fight does two things. Not only does it show off how skilled a duelist the Emperor is, but it also shows out how skilled a duelist Mace is, because in the movies we hadn't really seen Mace in a duel yet. I mean, in the novels we've seen him duel, in the animated series we've seen him fight and duel, but this shows off how skilled a duelist he is, which works. Because think of it, one of the most powerful Sith Lords in existence versus one of the most powerful Jedi in the Order. A great fight. Of course, the ending of the duel is up to debate of whether or not Mace actually defeated the Emperor saber-wise via skill, or whether the Emperor let him win. I lean more towards Mace defeating him via skill, and that's for one reason, which is connected to the next duel, which I will get on it when I get to that in the next duel. But it's very interesting. The only thing in the movie is I wish it had some of the good dialogue that the novel had, like a great line that Mace says right before the Sith lightning part begins. "You have lost, my lord. And you have lost for the same reason the Sith always lose. They are defeated by their own fear. Fool, do you think that the fear you feel is mine?" Now that was great dialogue. But of course, I still like that line that the Emperor says right before Mace falls. "Unlimited power!" Well, that is a Sith line if I've ever heard one. Now moving on to Yoda versus Palpatine. This once again shows off Yoda's skills, but even more so than his fight against Dooku, because we get to see the limit of his power. Which, of course, it's made more clear in the novel than in the movie, but Yoda, force-wise, is outclassed. Because he, as the novel puts it, he had been training the Jedi the way that the Jedi that he was trained by were trained. So he's basically basing the whole Order on the Jedi that trained him, the Jedi that fought the original Sith Lords from 1,000 years ago. And that was the big mistake. If he had been allowing the Order to evolve, the Jedi probably wouldn't have fallen as easily as they did. Because the Sith evolved over time. Granted, Bane wasn't the first Sith to think that there shouldn't be a whole bunch of them at once, but he evolved. The Sith evolved over that 1,000 years. Their 1,000 years of hatred and training in secret is what Palpatine embodied. And even though he was around for a majority of those times and studied and trained with multiple Jedi Masters, trained multiple Jedi Masters, and spent hundreds of years in study, he just didn't have it Force-wise against the Emperor. Which I said, this is made more clear in the novel, though I do like one scene in the movie where it looks like Palpatine knows he's the stronger one, but he gets overconfident and probably lowers his guard, and then Yoda's able to make their powers explode. Now, saber-wise, I believe that Yoda has the Emperor outclassed. Because the Emperor, as a skilled duelist as he is, Yoda has been training for hundreds of years, saber-wise. It would make sense for him to be the stronger one. That one. Then again, someone's going to say, but wouldn't Yoda also be stronger with the Force? Sure, you can make that argument, but still, like I said, Palpatine embodies the hatred. And as we know, that when the Sith give into their hatred, they get stronger. Granted, it's not the type of strength you would want, at least in Star Wars. If you're a Saiyan warrior, that'd be different. But in the Star Wars universe, giving into your hatred, not good. Which is something that Luke learns a lot in the expanded universe. Strength gained through giving into your hatred is not strength you'd probably want. But anyway, the saber-wise, I enjoy the choreography in the live-action movie, and it's basically it's kind of skimmed over that much, if I remember correctly. I mean, the saber fight. Most of the fight in the novel is basically internally talk about the power, and then a little bit near the end of the duel, and probably some of the saber combat. But saber combat, I think, is done better in the movie. And the thing to connect to the Mace fight, Yoda and Mace, it's hard to determine which one is the more skilled duelist, but they're at least even with each other, I will say. I personally feel that probably Yoda might be a more skilled duelist. I feel that probably they're more or less even because of their different styles, whereas Mace uses Voped, which is one of the reasons I believe he actually defeated the Emperor via combat. The other one is that you could tell from the look on the Emperor's face right before it cuts away back to Anakin and Obi-Wan that the Emperor is nearing the end of his rope saber-wise, because Yoda has them saber-locked, and the Emperor is trying to overcome it. You can tell there's frustration growing in him. Now, the only reason I could see frustration growing in a Sith Lord is if he knows that he's outmatched. Granted, Dooku was defeated by Yoda in a similar manner, but he's more of a gentleman, so I wouldn't really see him frustrated unless it's something like him caught off guard, like with Anakin and Obi-Wan. That I could see him being frustrated there, or when he's betrayed, but those are the only two times. Or like when he was shocked. Not shocked, that'd be more shock, but the Emperor, with him having so much passion and stuff in his anger, I could see him growing frustrated when he sees he's outclassed. Which is why I believe in between scenes he discards his lightsaber or is disarmed and then starts, throwing stuff. Because he knows that that's the only way he can defeat Yoda. And anyway, it's also another good thing I like about this is it adds to the storyline. It shows why Yoda goes into hiding. Well, not only because he knows he can't beat the Emperor, but it also gives him an insight into how they can defeat the Emperor, about how he'll have to change the order, and from that it explains why they don't train the twins from birth, because that would just be making the same mistake he's been making. They have to have no love, which of course, in hindsight, this is actually this is a wise decision Yoda made, because it was actually the emotion love, which the Jedi had basically ostracized for years, that actually ended up destroying this new Sith Order. Or at least Palpatine and Vader, because it was love that allowed Vader to break free from his grip on the dark side, which I'll get to that in a little bit, but that works. Now we're coming to my last, now we got 4 left. Note that 3 of them are from the movies, okay? Number 4 is Luke versus Vader 1, their duel on Bespin. Now what I love about this fight is it shows just how skilled a duelist Luke has become. Because in the expanded universe, they have a duel in the first expanded universe work in the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but Luke is basically possessed by Obi-Wan's spirit there, which is why they have that line in the movie, Obi-Wan can no longer help him, which, if you're thinking, yeah, you killed him, of course, I think the Emperor knows that, so it makes that line make a lot more sense if you think about it. And of course, it also adds a little bit to the line, the Force is with you, but you are not a Jedi yet. That line, either way it makes sense, but it adds a little bit more context to it if Vader had already been in the room with Luke, sensed how powerful he was before, and then actually dueled him and noticed it wasn't him. And of course it adds a little bit more to the fact that he actually starts going serious against Luke. And now what makes this fight grand is because at the time, Luke does not know that Vader is his father. So basically he's fighting to protect his friends, but also, even though it's not a Jedi thing, to get revenge, because he thinks this is the man who murdered his father. Granted, he's holding back his anger, but he can tell that that Vader has to die in order for the galaxy to be free, because both him and the Emperor would have to die. And of course, we can see that passion seep through in a couple parts, but he holds the anger at bay. I mean, even near the end, when he taunts him about Obi-Wan, and of course, we see how skilled he is because he manages to injure Vader. Not that many duelists. Now, when Vader first was in his suit, a couple duelists injured him, but after that, when he appropriately modified his style, hardly any Jedi were able to injure him. So it shows off Luke's natural skill even more, that he, a Jedi who has not had as much training as those other Jedi, managed to injure his father. And then, of course, the emotional moment behind when we find out the truth about Vader. That's a very emotional moment. But one of the things I really do like about this duel is how grand it is. Of course, we start in the carbonite freezing chamber. Then we move to a catwalk in front of I wouldn't say a catwalk, more like a hallway in front of a window that Luke has thrown out. Then we're up on catwalks. And it's just a grand duel. Because the first movie, we just had a basic Kando-like duel, so this umps the ante, and this duel is one of the reasons why Episode 5 is my favorite film in the series. But it's not my favorite duel. You'll see why in a minute. Now, number 3 is a duel that I don't know if that many people who do not read the Expanded Universe know about this duel, but it is one of my favorite ones, which is why it's number 3. It's another 2-part one. It is Luke versus Palpatine. Now, this comes from the Dark Empire comic number 1. Now, the whole plot of Dark Empire is we find out that the Emperor actually cloned himself, so his death on the Death Star was not the end of him. He basically just transferred his soul into clone bodies, which at the time it came out, I know people complained about it, but in retrospect, if you think about it, the Emperor trying to find a way to create immortal life and stuff, it would fit in his character that if he couldn't figure it out using the Force, he would resort to the only other technology at bay, clones. Now, of course, it's not Kamino clones, which Kamino wasn't created when this came out, so it makes sense. It's some other cloning, which at the time, the reason that the clones aged rapidly was because of his Force power, but in retrospect, I lean more towards that just being a story he's telling Luke. I lean more towards the cloning technology not being the best, so that and also maybe the DNA was degraded when it was taken, so the clones age rapidly. Think of it kind of like how the clone soldiers are, how they have that rapid aging. Think of that taken to the nth degree. And also, the fun thing about this is that these clones, since they have Palpatine's original mind in them, they have all of his knowledge of the Force, all his saber techniques, and a young body. So it's Palpatine in his prime. Now, if that Palpatine had fought Yoda, Yoda probably would have been fucked up. Even more so than he was. Because think about it, one of the big drawbacks that the Emperor had during his fight with Yoda was that he was in an older body. So like Yoda, he had to use the Force in order to make some of the movements in the saber battle, which is why he was kind of exhausted, and which is probably why he ended up having to call for help after Yoda falls. Now, against Luke, he doesn't really have that disadvantage, and of course, like, the whole thing with the saber combat, he basically just does that to humble him. Now, the first duel, Luke gets his backside handed to him, because he had never faced the Emperor before, and also he didn't expect to face this skilled duelist. Now, I guess before I should set up, the plot is that basically Luke finds this out and he fakes turning to the dark side in order to destroy it from within. The Emperor knows this the whole time, and then when Luke finally decides to make his move, the first duel happens. Luke gets his butt kicked. In the second duel, he's basically in an intermediate state between the light and dark side, basically like a slave. Leia manages to break him out, and then him and the Emperor have their battle. And as Leia looks on, she basically just sees them moving quickly, and it's basically the type of fight, I guess you could say, that the Emperor and Anakin probably would have had if Anakin hadn't turned to the dark side, because him being the chosen one, he would have had to have fought the Dark Lord of the Sith eventually. So it's basically the kind of fight that would have happened if it basically the stand-in for that fight in the canon. So basically during the fight, the Emperor is the Avatar of Darkness, and Luke is basically the avatar of light. And since he's more powerful now, since he came out of the dark side, and since he actually knows the Emperor's fighting style now, like with Vader, he actually beats him. Of course, the one thing about it is that in the panel-wise, the fight isn't that long, but if they ever adapted it, I think they would make the fight longer. And I do like the fact that Luke manages to defeat the Emperor, which just shows how because it shows a few things. One, how naturally gifted a duelist he is, and two, the Emperor's overconfidence. Like, I already beat you. This is not going to take long. Ah, my hand! I don't know why I made him sound nasally there. I am the Dark Lord of the Sith. I have a nasal voice. Ah, my hand! Ah! But before I forget to mention, yes, I know Leia was using battle meditation during the second fight, at least a little bit, but hey, the Emperor used it at Endor, so who cares? Besides, for me, it doesn't really diminish Luke's skill with the blade. It just was a little added help on him focusing. And then, of course, the force-wise, he's still not stronger than the Emperor there, so him and Leia have to help. Or maybe you can also make the argument that maybe Luke wasn't fully recovered from returning to the dark side, so force-wise, he probably wouldn't have done much against the Emperor. But hey, at least it allows Leia to do something. And now, number 2. Anakin vs. Obi-Wan, the battle on Mustafar from Episode 3. Now, what I love about this is a very elaborate duel in that it has a lot of settings, and it also is a very emotional duel because of the setup. Anakin had just finished talking with his wife, and she's basically saying that she cannot be with him because of the dark side thing, and he suspects it's because of Obi-Wan. Now, this is more clear in the novel, but one of the original plot threads for the movie that is actually used in the novel is that Anakin suspects that Padme's having an affair with Obi-Wan, which explains his line, "You're with him." Which, if they had kept that thread in the movie, this scene would have made a lot more sense. And it also explains his anger when he sees Obi-Wan, because she thinks that she's going with him, the twins might not be his, and that she basically was all faking all the last few days, and that she brought him here to kill him, and that's the reason he force chokes her. And that also explains his anger at Obi-Wan, because he feels that Obi-Wan betrayed him and turned his wife against him. And of course, Obi-Wan, as a friend, does not want to kill Anakin, but, like all the Jedi at the time, they believe that once you start down the dark path, forever will dominate your destiny. Anakin does not really want to kill his friend, but he says the famous line that this is probably my favorite line that Anakin says in the prequel trilogy: "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." Which, of course, kind of created in real life kind of a little tension when George W. Bush said something very similar. "You're either with us, or you are with the terrorists." Bush is a Sith Lord! Wouldn't really surprise me. Just like it wouldn't surprise me if Jar Jar turned out to be a real Sith Lord, like in Robot Chicken. But anyway, back on topic. It then leads into the duel, which it's very grand, and it really shows off both of their fighting styles. And I do not have a problem with how long the duel lasts for one reason. They are best friends, and they train a lot together, so they'd be very familiar with each other's fighting styles. So it would be very difficult for one to overcome the other. Granted, they would know what to expect from one another, and you could probably guess what to combat it with. But since they probably trained so often together and also have fought side by side a lot, it'd be kind of hard to do that. Because Obi-Wan is basically a defense fighter, so he'd be defending all against Anakin's onslaught while trying to see an opening, whereas Anakin is an offensive-defensive person. He'd be trying to break through Obi-Wan's defense and be unable to. And also add into the fact that their fighting techniques are basically brother fighting techniques. Because Form 5 was developed by practitioners of Form 3 because they thought it was too passive, so it adds into it. And also, you can also make the argument that maybe they still didn't want to strike each other down. Maybe that's why Obi-Wan was probably leading the duel to a place where he probably wouldn't have to do the deed himself. And of course, Anakin, we can see at one part, he would have no problem with killing Obi-Wan because of his anger. But that's the other thing about it, at least during the Force parts, is that Anakin probably is too enraged at himself and all that to focus straight, which is why I don't have a problem with the Force push part. That's probably one of Obi-Wan's most strong techniques, next to the, "You don't want to sell me death sticks." "I don't want to sell you death sticks. You want to go home and rethink your life." The mind thing. That's probably his strongest Force thing. But the thing is that the setting also helps this fight because it's on a volcanic planet, so it basically embodies the anger that is inside of Anakin. And then, of course, as it goes to different parts, because first we start off on a platform, then we go into a control room, then we're out on a balcony where we see lava exploding. Some people might complain about that part where they're on the cable things, but I don't mind it. And then fighting on the platform, that was actually a cool part. Now, seeing that on the big screen was seeing this duel on the big screen was epic, I will tell you, if you never got a chance to see it in the theater. And then, of course, the ending, the high ground thing, and how Anakin eventually loses a fight, I can buy it. Especially considering, like I said, he's in his anger, so he wouldn't be thinking straight. And also it connects to the duel that's my top on the list, which I will get to that shortly. And then, of course, the whole ending speech, "You were the chosen one," and all that. That is just Obi-Wan unable to hold back his emotions anymore, and then telling Anakin all this, and then Anakin going, "I hate you," as he's immolated. That is the perfect way to end the duel. And then, of course, Obi-Wan not killing Anakin is totally in his character. And even as the novelization puts it, it would be a mercy to kill him. He was not feeling merciful. He would just leave it to the Force. Because if you try to kill him, granted, you can make the argument, oh, it's putting him out of his misery, but it's also striking down an unarmed man. Something that the Jedi probably wouldn't tolerate, and that's the reason why. And third, the Emperor was near, so he would be risking himself and the lives of the other people on the planet by wasting time doing it, so he just runs. And then, of course, it leads in, of course, the birthing scene and the birth of Darth Vader, which I love that, which I'll get more of that when I re-review the films one day. Now, my favorite lightsaber duel of all time. If you guys know me, you should probably guess what it is. It is, of course, Luke versus Vader 2 from Return of the Jedi. Now, start off, originally this duel was going to be a lot more grander than their first duel, but then Lucas decided during filming, you know what, nah, let's just make it just like a bunch of guys banging sticks together. What makes it bigger is what's in here, which is the reason why it's my favorite duel. Granted, it's not as elaborate as their first duel or a lot of the other duels on here, but Lucas is right. What makes it so grand is what we know what's going on emotionally, especially the build-up to the duel. It takes a while to build up the duel. It's the last fight in the Battle of Endor that happens. Just think of it, before that we get the fight on the ground and the Star Battle, and this is the last battle that happens. And it works, all the build-up. Because the Emperor and Vader trying to turn Luke to the dark side, but tempting it's the only way to save your friends. Fire the Death Star beam. I can feel your anger. And then, of course, Vader protecting his master, and then the Emperor smirking as he watches a father and son try to kill each other. And it's never hinted on, but I'm guessing that the Emperor probably is taking notes on Luke's fighting style and is probably impressed. Probably even more so because he's seeing that he's actually better than Vader during this duel, which would make sense because in between movies, Luke actually did study more about lightsaber combat. I mean, we see a little bit of that in the prequel to Episode 4, which actually it's more of a mid-quel book, but it's a prequel to Episode 4, a prequel to Episode 6, sequel to Episode 5, Shadows of the Empire. And as the duel goes, it's basically them circling around each other, trying to gain an advantage. At first, of course, Luke is fighting with anger, but then eventually comes down and just defends, which I like how he defends. And then, of course, the thing that kind of, in retrospect, references the duel in Episode 3 is when Luke gets the high ground and Vader doesn't follow him. He learned his lesson not to follow someone when they get the high ground. Which, there's actually a lot of fan videos that reference this, where it actually shows that footage and then does it, which would make sense why Vader pauses for a second, then walks up and then throws his lightsaber. Because he's like, I'm not going to get injured again, I'm already handicapped enough. And then, of course, the scene underground in the thing. And then, of course, Vader taunting Luke, and then Luke giving into anger and easily beating Vader. That makes sense, considering that Luke... We see at that point that they're probably even, or maybe Luke is a little bit more skilled than Vader, despite his minimal training. So Luke giving into the dark side, even for a split second, I can see that making him superior to Vader. It makes sense. And then, of course, the Emperor trying to goad him into killing him, and then him realizing he's making the same mistake his father made. It works, and then, of course, from there we get the whole thing where the Emperor tries to kill Luke, and then Vader slowly turns back into Anakin. Because of love, which, as I mentioned before, love is the thing that the Jedi banned, is what eventually helps Anakin break free from the dark side and defeat Palpatine. Well, I should say kill Palpatine. Which, the ironic thing about that, it was love that made him turn to the dark side in the first place, because he thought that he could prevent Padme from dying only to cause it. So I guess there's probably some of that thinking that maybe he's like, I couldn't stop Padme from dying, but I can at least stop our son from dying. Probably some of that thought in his mind. And of course, as we all know, Lucas ruined this scene in the latest re-release by adding no to it. Lucas, no worked in a scene where Vader finds out he killed Padme, because he's still Anakin and Vader at the same time, and also it's his grief. Granted, it works better in the novel where it's just his anger, but I don't have a problem with him yelling no. Probably would have been a little bit better if it was a little bit more angry no, of an angry no, but I don't think James Earl Jones could have probably done that. Or maybe he did, but they just chose that one. But that I had no problem with. Adding it in here kills the scene, because what makes that part of the scene work is that it's all in Vader's head. Just him looking, and even though we can't really see his face, the mask and how he's moving his body, that tells everything. Body language acting. And that and the music also helps. Good example of how music helps a scene. And also, I guess you could see why this is my favorite lightsaber duel now. It's because of the build-up and the follow-up, and also the emotional impact of the duel. Which is why it's my favorite duel out of the entire Star Wars saga. Not to say that the other ones on this list are bad, it's just that the emotional impact that this duel has on the whole story, before and after, is what makes it a great duel. And also the fact is that probably when this film came out, nobody probably knew this, probably no one probably saw this coming. They probably thought, what's going to happen? Oh my god, Vader's turned from the dark side. But anyway, that's my list of top 11 lightsaber duels. If you guys have a list, feel free to do a video response to this. But I don't want to see any comments like, oh, you're an idiot for listening. Remember, this is my opinion. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I looked through all of them, and this is my opinion based on the duels that I've read, seen, etc. They're my favorite duels. Though, if I were to give any honorable mentions, the honorable mentions would probably go to Kit Fisto versus General Grievous, Obi-Wan and Ventress versus Darth Maul and Savage Opress, Obi-Wan versus Ventress from the Clone Wars pilot, probably the Starkiller Vader fight from the second Force Unleashed game, and of course maybe that fight between Luke and Vader and Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And also Vader's first fight in the suit, that would be another one. Those would be my honorable mentions. Anyway, that concludes this video. Hey, almost 50 minutes. That's probably the longest video I've done in a while. So hope everyone enjoys it, and I'm out.